This podcast is brought to you by North Carolina's Electric Cooperatives.
This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome. You've heard and read the spin the media and the politicians have put on the issues of the day. To get the correct spin on what's going on in North Carolina, let's introduce you to our panel of experts. They include former legislator and former chairman of the State Board of Education, Phil Kirk, executive director of NC Policy Watch, Chris Fitzsimon, syndicated columnist and author, John Hood, and Peg O'Connell, political analyst and lobbyist and very informed about politics in our state. Well, this week's show should be loaded with information and good discussion. We begin by talking about the compromised budget passed by the legislature this week. We'll discuss why Governor Cooper hasn't appointed a new Elections and Ethics Board. And if we have time, we want to talk about a recent protest that resulted in 32 people being banned from the legislature. But, as always, we ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. Let's get started. As is generally the case, both the House and Senate had differing versions for the $23 billion state general fund budget. They established a conference committee to iron out their differences, and the final version was released late Monday, passed later in the week. We want our panel to talk about the budget compromise. I want to ask each of you to give the compromise budget a letter grade from A to F and tell us why you graded it as you did. John Hood, I'll start with you.
Tom, I'll give it an A-. Not that I don't agree. I disagree with some of the specifics in some areas. There's some things that came in late that were in neither budget, which I dislike. But in general, I like the architecture of the budget, the amount of money that's put into savings, the fact that spending is constrained but significant in some areas of high priority, like principal and assistant principal salaries. I like the tax changes for the most part, and in particular that they were phased in more slowly. So I like the architecture of the plan. That's what gives it the A- for me.
Peg, give them a grade and tell us why.
Well, in full disclosure, I worked to get some things in that budget, so I'm happy about those, just so people know that. I would give it a C. There were things that were very good, and John referenced some of those things, some things that needed to be done, teacher pay and things like that. As a beneficiary of the state retirement system, I appreciate that. There was some investment in some good programs, but not enough. We are out of the recession. According to our leaders, things are booming. We should be investing more in important programs.
Phil Kirk, give us a grade.
I give it an A-. I thought it was a conservative budget. The growth rate is 3% over spending last year, and the governor wanted 5%, so a little bit of difference. Teacher pay is going up over the next 2 years, 9.6%. The governor wanted 10%. That's fairly close. The money put in savings, we're now at 8% for the first time in history, and that's what we've been telling locals they had to do. I like the fact they restored some of the things that were done by the Senate at 3 a.m. in the morning. I think all of those were restored, and the principal and assistant principal pay. It's obviously a compromise doesn't please much of anybody, but I thought they did a good job.
Chris, to you.
Well, I thought whatever goodwill they had evaporated. I was going to give it a A for appalling, but I would worry people would misconstrue that. So I'll say a D for dreadful. Here's what happened. They went back in those closed rooms. They decided they wanted to divide up some pork barrel like it was 1975. $70 to $100 million of pet projects, individual projects, a lot of it in Speaker Moore and President Pro Tem Berger's districts. Unbelievable. None of that was in either budget. Then they went in there and they decided to cut Josh Stein's budget dramatically. Then they went in there and cut almost $1 million from Governor Cooper's budget. Apparently Governor McCrory was okay if he had $5 million for his staff, but not Governor Cooper. This is one of the most appalling things I've seen since Billy Watkins was running the budget in the General Assembly. I have a lot of objections about the substance, but the style and the process and handing out pork barrel projects at the last minute in secret that nobody had ever seen is unbelievable.
Maybe next time I need to ask for a style grade.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, you can get like a swim meet or something like that. Phil, the Senate wanted to cut taxes by $1 billion. The House wanted less. The compromise was that personal income tax rates, which would achieve the $1 billion savings, would be cut from 5.25% to cut to 5.25% from 5.499%. The standard deduction was raised for $20,000 for family, but they didn't put any of this effect in next year. They put it in 2019. What was the logic behind that?
I assume it was part of a compromise and between the Senate and the House, and it was traded for some other things. And frankly, they may have wanted to have a little more money to spend next year. So I don't have any inside information, but I think it enabled them to spend more money this time. And it also was a fight between the House and the Senate.
Well, they had to fund those pork barrel things some way.
Right.
It's worth noting that because the tax cuts don't begin until the second year of the biennium, and they only for the calendar year of 2019, what you're really looking at is about half of the fiscal impact when those tax reductions are fully implemented.
Gotcha.
So in the 2019-2020 budget, these changes will be in the range of about $1 billion, maybe a little bit more depending upon the economy. Now that's a very important question. We only do 2-year budgets. We need to be thinking beyond that. This apparently is what Governor Cooper was getting at when he complained that this was a fiscally irresponsible budget. Now, I think he's ignoring lots of other pieces of the puzzle, like almost $1 billion is unappropriated in both years, just added to the unreserved credit balance in case there's a problem. Money is put into the rainy day fund in case there's a problem. Money's put into other reserves in case there's a problem. And spending goes up over the 2 years about $1.8 billion, which will end up being about $2 billion the following year. So the point is, that is important to understand that the tax reductions will have a long-term effect that is larger than what we see. But other pieces of the budget are highly responsible.
Chris, it's been mentioned about the pay increases. Phil said that teachers end up getting 3.3% this coming year, 9.6% over the next 2 years. Principals got 8.6% this coming year, 13% I think it was over the 2 years. State employees got a $1,000 flat pay increase and some additional days of leave. Retirees got a 1% COLA. Comment on what they did.
Well,
with
a couple
pay.
things. First of all, the final budget plan doesn't give every teacher a raise, and some teachers get tiny raises. Governor Cooper gave every teacher, I think, at least a 3.5% raise. So part of the money we're talking about in the average percentage, but the way it's distributed is a lot different. State employees, $1,000 for somebody that makes $50,000. It's what is that? A 2% raise. Retirees get a 1% cost of living increase, which is better than was in any of the budgets. But it's pretty amazing, and Peg referenced this earlier. We are in an era with surplus. Our economy is doing fairly well. We've been doing fairly well for years. Retirees and state employees have been ignored. If a 1% cost of living increase is the best we can do in the good times, well, I'm not for retirees. I'm not sure what we're going to do when the next recession comes along. I think Peg is right. We're missing an opportunity to make some investments while we have the resources.
Yeah, John, I want to talk about the pre-K because a lot of discussion taking place about the waiting list for pre-K enrollment for young people. The House wanted to eliminate the waiting list. The Senate, not so much. The compromise ended up funding another 3,500 slots, which they say is about 75% of the waiting list. Comment on it.
Well, it's 75% if you make an assumption about what the demand for the program will be. It's not an ironclad assumption, but it certainly reduces significantly the number of preschoolers who are at risk, who are eligible for the program, but there was not money for them. It significantly reduces that difference.
And Peg, one of your pet projects is opioid abuse, and interestingly enough, in the compromise, they ended up with $10 million to put into this for treatment funds, which was more than either the House or the Senate came up with. I guess my question is it enough?
No, the epidemic in North Carolina is absolutely huge. It's a step in the right direction. We've gotten a large grant from the federal government that will help, but I think at the same time that they were working on this and putting that money in a pot, which I'm always surprised when more money comes out, when everybody says, I'm sorry, we can't do anything more than either one or the other house, but that's just my pet peeve. When Governor Cooper was up in Washington talking to the president and being on the opioid commission, at the same time that they're throwing $10 million at this issue, which is important, they're also not expanding Medicaid, and they're not doing things that could hurt people accessing regular health care. And we know that people who are struggling with opioid abuse, who don't have access to primary care, are in big trouble. So, I think in some ways they're like, here, have this bone, but we're really going to take the rest of the fish away.
All right, we're going to take a break and come back and talk some more about this budget compromise after these messages.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
Every year, North Carolina patients undergo 635,000 same-day surgeries. 72% of these surgeries are performed in our highest-cost hospital facilities, adding as much as $2,000 to every procedure. The state's outdated Certificate of Need law prevents competition from lower-cost, higher-quality same-day surgery centers, inflating healthcare costs and limiting patient choice. Tell state lawmakers it's time to lower healthcare costs now. It's time to make a simple fix to an outdated law, increasing patient choice and lowering healthcare costs now. You can help. Visit reformconnow.com and tell lawmakers it's time for a simple fix to an outdated law. It's time to lower healthcare costs now.
North Carolina has over 300,000 government retirees who depend on their pension. Since the 2008 recession, retirees have seen little or no cost of living increase, while inflation has increased more than 14%. Investing in our retirees is good for the economy. Every pension dollar generates more than $2 for your local economy. Tell your local and state elected official it's time to take care of our retirees and fund a cost of living increase.
Learn more at ncrgea.com.
I hear it all the time. Rising health care costs are squeezing North Carolina families. Deductibles continue to climb, prescription drug prices are skyrocketing, medical bills are unknown until they arrive in the mail, and premiums are increasing by double digits. This is decimating family budgets. We should be focused on education and jobs, not EpiPen cost and medical bill errors. We need quality, affordable, and transparent health care for our families.
North Carolina spends billions on uncompensated medical care every year. To learn how a North Carolina solution for covering the uninsured can help your county, visit careforcarolina.com.
We now return to NC Spin.
I want to continue our analysis of the budget that was passed this past week. In recognition of the transportation needs of our state, the budget's going to add $363 million, Phil, to priority construction highway needs. We got a $25 billion plus backlog of needs here. Does this mean that the lawmakers don't intend to do any more than this?
I have not heard much talk about a bond issue for infrastructure. I know there's a move to have a $1.9 billion.
Well, the House wanted to do some,
right,
but they wanted it primarily with public schools.
Well, that's what I was going to say. There's a $1.9 billion they want to do for public schools, but I hadn't heard of any much movement on that. Clearly, more's got to be done. I think they also appropriated more for airport expansion than at 10 or 12 airports around the state that they hadn't done.
And
recently.
they decided to take $100 million from the lottery proceeds, Chris, for rural school construction, which I think is certainly needed, but they're making these rural counties match the funds 3-to-1.
I think it might be tough for some of the counties that don't have a lot of money in the low tax bases, but I think the idea of using lottery money for school construction, which is all really it should be used for, instead of ongoing money, they're increasingly moving lottery money around to do all sorts of things, which was not the point of the lottery in the first place.
John, they did tackle the raise the age issue, although there were some delays in that. Tell us what
well,
went on.
you have to fund some installations for an increased caseload of juvenile delinquents, juvenile offenders. Partly this is a policy change in the budget, which we ought to object to on principle, but partly this is a budgetary question. Well, I mean, of course, you would have to appropriate funds in the budget if you're going to implement raise the age, but keep in mind, the argument is you spend a little bit more money now to treat the 16 to 17-year-olds as juveniles rather than as adults. But if you reduce the recidivism rate in the long run, that will save taxpayer money.
There is a problem with the raise the age, though, as identified on the House floor. There's a provision in there that if a 16 or 17-year-old is convicted of a traffic offense, say speeding 15 miles over the speed limit, then if he or she commits a crime, they're automatically tried as adults. That no longer applies. So somebody snuck that into the bill. I think that some folks, Representative McGrady and others, are committed to fixing it, but there's still a big problem.
Well, Chris mentioned this, Peg. You remember back in the late 80s and 90s.
I was a child, Tom.
We used to
The
see
1890s.
we used to see lots of special provisions,
Mm-hmm.
we called them then, snuck into the budget bill, which were essentially policy issues. They got better about that for a while, but this budget is loaded with them, isn't it?
You know, I heard Dr. Andrew Taylor from NC State say that the Senate and the House seem to have a lot of difficulty coming to any agreement on anything, and the one thing they have to do is the budget. So our budgets have been increasingly loaded up with policy language, simply because they can't seem to agree on individual bills. The problem with it, and I've got some things that ended up in policy language in the budget, is you don't get to talk about it. This stuff gets dropped in the middle of the night. You hope that the person who's running the issue for you is strong enough to keep it there, but there's no transparency. There's no light of day on it.
Phil, we saw an awful lot of partisanship at work in this budget, particularly aimed at Democrats.
Really?
As Chris or someone was saying, they took $10 million out of the Attorney General's budget and about $1 million out of the governor's budget.
Well, having worked in Governor Holshouser and Governor Martin's office, the Democrats, I don't know the dollar amount, don't remember, they did the very same thing. I didn't think that was right, and I don't think this is right. But they learned, and just like the special provisions and the policy issues, I don't agree with that either, but they learned it from the Democrats.
All
That
right.
doesn't make it right.
Yeah, no,
But,
it doesn't. Two wrongs don't make a right. That's
yeah,
what
but
Mom always said.
Republicans always get the blame.
Yeah,
So.
well, I don't know.
Well, a lot of the reason is because they ran saying they weren't going to do it.
Oh, I know.
I mean, that's part of the issue.
Well,
That's
and,
part
and
of the problem with
going back
politics.
18 years, we did a lot of criticizing of that when it happened too. Roy Cooper said, John, this was one of the most physically irresponsible budgets that he'd seen. Everybody immediately expected he was going to veto this thing. It appears that the legislature has the votes, though, the 3/5 majority votes, to be able to override him. So my question is this just an exercise in futility for Governor Cooper? Or
It is
this
not futility, it is partisan politics. He's giving the base what he believes the base wants to hear. By the way, poorly served. Whoever came up with that phrase for him, or if he did it, I mean, he was an appropriator in the legislature and crafted budgets that subsequently had gigantic deficits. Now, I'm not blaming him personally. A lot of times this was because of recessions that would come along or things that they would miscue. But that was a really unwise thing for him to say, given that he has presided or voted for clearly irresponsible budgets. This was not
But
one
does
of
this
them.
give him some ammunition on the stump, being able to go across the state and talk about?
Well, I mean, part of this is, it's not just partisan politics. The governor fundamentally disagrees with a lot of the decisions in his budget. He has a constitutional ability to make that clear with the veto stamp. They can override it, which is the General Assembly's constitutional responsibility. So it's not all, sure, partisan politics are playing a role, but he's doing his job, and I think he wants to make sure that people in North Carolina know that he thinks there's a better way to do a budget.
Is there any other legislation that y'all noted that needs to be commented on so far as the budget is concerned, or any big issues that are remaining on the table before the legislature?
I don't know about the vote in the House, whether any Democrats voted for it.
There were.
There
were Democrats in both chambers.
There were 4 or 5 in the Senate that voted for it, so you're going to hear the Republicans talking about the bipartisan budget.
I wanted to highlight one provision which I think is really terrible news, which is ending the funding mechanism for North Carolina Legal Services, which is legal representation in the civil system for poor folks, low-income families who are, say, fighting foreclosure. Even if it's wrong, they have an attorney, or if they are domestic violence issues. There's all sorts of things that people who don't have a lot of money and access to the criminal justice system rely on legal aid for. That money now is cut, which is shocking since 2 lawyers run the chambers.
All right, Peg, whenever the budget's passed, people immediately start saying, okay, when's adjournment going to take place? How much longer are they going to be in town? You hang out over the legislature quite a bit. What's your speculation as to when they might wrap this thing up?
So after the budget, the legislature concludes its work with the budget. The governor, well, if they're in session, has 10 days to either sign or veto it, or not sign it, but let it become law. If he does do it in that period of time, then they'll want to stay to override. So I think they'll be here at least 10 days, unless he vetoes it, first thing Monday morning or something like that. People are talking about coming back after the 4th of July, so at least for a short period of time. So I think they'll be here till that time. And then I've already heard people talking about special sessions, which why they would adjourn in the first place, I don't know.
All right, we're going to take a break, come back and talk about the fact Governor Cooper hasn't appointed anyone to the new Ethics Commission and Board of Elections.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
It costs hundreds of thousands of dollars to become a trained eye surgeon, but North Carolina optometrists have another plan. Instead of medical school, they spent hundreds of thousands of dollars in campaign contributions to politicians. They're not surgeons, so they're pushing legislation to allow them to perform eye surgery without medical school. 90% of North Carolina voters disagree, but lawmakers still need to hear from you. Call your state senator and tell them to stop HB 36 now.
The healthcare landscape is filled with questions and uncertainties of changes that are coming. In these times of change, there's one thing you can trust. You can trust your family physician to work for you, not only in treating sickness and disease, but also your overall health. Regardless of how healthcare might change, the men and women of the North Carolina Academy of Family Physicians pledge to work upholding your trust. Family physicians, your trusted healthcare advisors.
I help educate and inspire visually impaired students to strive for a brighter future.
I make sure visitors to the North Carolina Zoo take a walk on the wild side.
And I make sure that the fuel you buy is a quality product from pipeline to pump.
I support small businesses in North Carolina by matching them with hard-working, well-trained employees.
I make sure the roads you drive on are safe.
Scenic, the one voice speaking in support of the men and women who are making North Carolina great.
You sleep on concrete till your body get immune to concrete.
My mom got my brother and I up and said, "Come on, we're leaving."
I became homeless in the beginning of this year.
When I was about 4 or 5 years old, our house caught fire.
I used to see my brother. If he see me, he'd turn and go the other direction.
We did the only thing that we could think of, and we went to a Salvation Army shelter.
We don't have this, what's your background look like? We just say, what do you need?
I remember the man from the Salvation Army coming down with a box of clothes.
The Salvation Army officer bought my brother and I an ice cream cone.
Last week, my brother walked up to me, and he just started a conversation.
Today I've given my life to the Salvation Army because I remember what somebody did for me, my brother, and my mom over 30 years ago.
The Salvation Army for me means hope.
Compassion.
Family.
Support.
We now return to NC Spin.
The North Carolina Court of Appeals rejected Governor Cooper's request to put on hold the creation of the law that created a new board from the Ethics Commission and State Board of Elections. The law stipulated the board consists of 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans. The governor appoints from a list submitted by both parties. Governor Cooper is appealing the ruling, but meantime, he's not appointed anyone to this new board, essentially leaving the state without an elections board. Peg, what's the reason why Cooper isn't appointing anyone? Does he think that by doing so, it might hurt his appeal?
Well, Tom, as much as I would like, the governor doesn't call me and tell me stuff like that. But I think
you and Sean Spicer should get together.
Yeah, but I don't work for the governor. That's different. I think it's twofold. Actually, the statute, as such as it is, says that the governor must get a list of names from both parties. Well, the Democrats have not sent forward the list of their nominees yet. So I think there's a technical failure there. And, he is alleging that there could be irreparable harm done to the state.
All right, but I want to play what if for a second here. The big question in many minds is we might get a decision from the 3-judge federal panel concerning this redistricting, assuming that they require that it be done this year, assuming that there might be an election held this year. We got no Board of Elections.
That's true, though the staff is still on the job. Right. So the staff is working for
somebody. But if any votes are required,
if
any votes are required, there's nobody there.
He can blame it on Commissioner Goodwin. as chairman of the Democratic Party because he hadn't given
He's been busy. He's been busy.
He hadn't given the list.
What he's doing is he's waiting to see what the courts finally decide. Just like the General Assembly didn't draw new districts when the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeal said you have to draw new districts. No, we're going to the Supreme Court. I think Governor Cooper believes this should go to the North Carolina Supreme Court.
All right, we're going to take a break and come back and ask the panel to tell us something we don't know.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
Year after year, fish populations shrink. Fishermen are struggling and outdated laws make the problem worse. But now, North Carolina legislators have a tremendous opportunity to grow our entire fishing economy, creating nearly 1,500 jobs and $1 billion in economic impact. House Bill 867 will revitalize our entire fishing economy. Tell your legislator to support our coastal fisheries and House Bill 867. Go to www.ncsoundeconomy.com to find out more. Paid for by NC Sound Economy.
North Carolina has over 300,000 government retirees who depend on their pension. Since the 2008 recession, retirees have seen little or no cost of living increase, while inflation has increased more than 14%. Investing in our retirees is good for the economy. Every pension dollar generates more than $2 for your local economy. Tell your local and state elected official it's time to take care of our retirees and fund a cost of living increase.
Learn more at ncrgea.com.
The cost of everything has gone up dramatically over the last 75 years. With one exception, keeping electricity affordable. That's the power of your co-op membership. Learn more at togetherwesave.com.
North Carolina's Touchstone Energy Cooperatives, looking out for you.
12,000 North Carolina veterans are uninsured with no options to buy health insurance. They fought for us. Now let's fight for them. Let's create a North Carolina solution for covering the uninsured.
To learn more, visit careforcarolina.com.
I help educate and inspire visually impaired students to strive for a brighter future.
I make sure visitors to the North Carolina Zoo take a walk on the wild side.
And I make sure that the fuel you buy is a quality product from pipeline to pump.
I support small businesses in North Carolina by matching them with hard-working, well-trained employees.
I make sure the roads you drive on are safe.
Scenic, the one voice speaking in support of the men and women who are making North Carolina great.
We now return to NC Spin.
Folks, I hate to tell you this, but we have just about run out of time in this show, and we're not going to have time to tell us something we don't know. Peg, earlier you mentioned the fact that there was already the talk of special sessions. Do we think that's going to be for redistricting, calling special elections? Is it possible the court might do this redistricting? Round the table very quickly.
It is possible all those things could happen. I haven't heard anything specific, but the time is running so short.
John?
I think it's possible, but unlikely we'll have an election before next November for the legislature.
Interesting. But
in other words, I think it'll be a regular election.
All right.
I think it's, I wish it were possible. I think it's now unlikely. I think the General Assembly leadership wants to have the next election with the same maps.
All right, so you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, give your feedback, and read my weekly column, visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook. Next week, we have more time for Tell Us Something We Don't Know, and we'll have more balanced debate for the Old North State. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
Join us next week and get the spin on issues facing our state.